Good day to everyone. We are the Group 4, and we are to present the principles of economics and the different approach of economist as a scientist and economist as a policymaker. But before everything, I would just like to introduce to you the presenters for this topic. We have Dayan Jian Chong, Paulo Martin, Jay Mendoza, Erica Sancho, and yours truly, Andrea Reyes. As we finish the discussion, our objectives is to 1. Know how the government can improve economic outcomes, and 2. Understanding how the standard of living depends on the country's production.
Principle 7. Governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. First, let's talk about the invisible hand of the marketplace. The invisible hand, as described by Adam Smith, is a metaphor describing the unintended greater social benefits and public good brought about by individuals acting in their own self-interest. It guides the self-interest that is motivating the participants in an economy into promoting general economic well-being. It can work only when the government enforces the rules and maintains the institutions that are key to a market economy. Market economies need institutions to enforce property rights. Property rights is defined as the ability of an individual to own and exercise control over scarce resources. It is given that with property rights, market transactions are more efficient when enforced and so that individuals can own and control scarce resources. Effective and well-defined property rights are deemed essential in providing the preconditions for economic growth. There are two reasons for a government to intervene in the economy and change the allocation of resources that people would choose on their own. First is the goal of efficiency. Economic efficiency is when all goods and factors of production in an economy are distributed or allocated to their most valuable uses. Economists use the term market failure, wherein a market left on its own fails to allocate resources efficiently. It is the economic situation defined by an inefficient distribution of goods and services in the free market. There are two possible reasons of market failure. First is externality. It is the impact of one person's actions on the well-being of a bystander. An example is the pollution. Factory owners may not consider the cost that pollution imposes on others, and the market may fail to take this cost into account. Second is market power. It is the ability of a single economic actor or small group of actors to have a substantial influence on market prices. It is about an organization's ability to control the price of a product by manipulating its supply or its demand. The second goal is goal of equality. Economic equality is about a level playing field where everyone has the same access to the same wealth. However, equality is not practiced in a society because the market economy prefers to reward people according to their ability to produce things that other people are willing to pay for. Policies are sometimes designed just to reward the politically powerful and sometimes made by well-intentioned leaders who are not fully informed.
Now, switching gears, after knowing about this principle, let us now know what is an economist. What does he do? How does he think? Who is an economist? There are actually two kinds of economists, an economist as a scientist and an economist as a policymaker. An economic scientist is making a claim about how the world works. He is attempting to describe the world as it is through measurements and data gathered. An economic policymaker, however, is trying to help improve or change the world about how the world is ought to be. The difference between them is that an economic scientist study the effects of a key natural resource on the world's economies. However, the economic policymakers poses a difficult choice about how to respond.
Hi, let's now proceed to some of the examples regarding the seventh principle of economics. Individual actions have side effects that are not properly taken into account by the market. Theories regarding the coronavirus led us to a market in China. This Chinese market sells other kinds of animals as food without being knowledgeable about such kinds of animals. Below are animal meats that can be considered safe for human consumption. Meanwhile, rats, snakes, and bats are obviously beyond the ordinary consumption of men. Hence, people tend to buy and eat it, trusting with whatever you say as the seller. This caused the pandemic we are still facing as of this very moment. People's curiosity may either lead us to a great discovery or worst, the end of human lives.
Now, after knowing about this example, let us now know what are the different approach of an economic scientist and economic policymaker in terms of this situation. An economic scientist will say and think that the illegal wildlife trade and consumption causes zoonotic diseases that leads to a possible epidemic and economic breakdown. On the other hand, the economic policymaker will say that the government should strictly implement existing laws and in accordance with this wildlife trade and consumption and modify the fines and penalties in case of breach.
Here's another issue we are facing during this pandemic that is related to how the government can sometimes improve economic outcomes. One party prevents mutually beneficial trades from occurring in an attempt to capture a greater share of resources for itself. An example is a drug company that prices a drug higher than the cost of producing it, making it unaffordable for some people who would benefit from it. As shown in our illustration, drugstore green is the closest and most realistic price for the production of vitamins, face masks, and shields, while drugstore red, obviously, sells the said products in an overpriced rate. During this pandemic, scientists and doctors recommend taking vitamins to boost our immune system to fight any other diseases while maintaining and observing the minimum health protocols wherever we are.
Here, the economic scientist will say the price gauging undermines the equitable access of goods for people, unfairly victimizing those who need it as much as anyone else. On the other hand, the economic policymaker will say the government should release orders, fines, and penalties to any business or company that engages in price gauging. As we finish the discussion, our objectives is to 1. Know how the government can improve economic outcomes, and 2. Understanding how the standard of living depends on the country's production.
Hello, everyone. Moving on to the next principle of economics is the standard of living depends on a country's production. The first key concept is the world are staggering. Why? It is due to the differences in living standards. Second, differences in the average income in each country is merely reflected in various measures of quality of life. An example for this is those countries with high income are more developed and citizens of them have more TV sets, more cars, better nutrition and healthcare, and has a longer life expectancy compared with the countries who has low income. Third, differences in productivity. What is productivity? Productivity is the amount of goods and services produced by each labor input. So, what is labor input? It is simply a combination of employment, hours per worker, and human capital per worker. Countries where workers has the capacity to produce large quantity of goods and services per hour are those people who enjoy high standard of living, while workers who are less productive are those people may endure a more meager of existence. It means that the growth rate of a nation's productivity determines the growth rate of its average income. And lastly, productivity and living standard has profound implications for public policy. The key question about how any policy will affect living standards is how it will affect our ability to produce goods and services. Policymakers need to raise productivity to boost living standards through ensuring those workers are well educated, have enough tools to use in producing goods and services, and lastly, have the access to the best available technology.
Hi, now let's have an example with regard to the principle 8 of economics. Our country, the Philippines, produces quality medical workers, but once they start working for the country, fair and reasonable income are nowhere to be found. Countries such as United States of America, United Kingdom, and Russia most likely has the money to formulate vaccines for the coronavirus disease. Incomes of health workers probably are higher in these countries as compared to our dearest country. Average income in rich countries is more than 10 times average income in poor countries. This is one of the reasons many Filipino medical workers invest in rendering services outside the country instead of staying here.
In this particular example, the economic scientist approach will be the minimum wage laws cause dissatisfaction and unemployment of healthcare workers. On the other hand, the economic policy maker approach will be government should raise the minimum wage and hazard pay of the healthcare workers, especially in this time of pandemic.
Let's have another scenario connected to our principle. One person's spending is another person's income. In a market economy, people make a living selling things, including their labor, to other people. If some group in the economy decides, for whatever reason, to spend more, the income of other groups will rise. If some group decides to spend less, the income of other groups will fall. Because one person's spending is another person's income. A chain reaction of changes in spending behavior tends to have repercussions that spread through the economy. For example, when the president declared a state of calamity due to COVID-19, almost all industries were stopped temporarily. Hence, the production of goods and services were limited or if not, needed to stop. People consume larger quantity of goods during this pandemic since many are forced to stay at home. But not all can avail as much goods as the privileged ones can avail.
The economic scientist approach will be the limited resources and unequal distribution of resources causes scarcity more so in this pandemic. On the other hand, the economic policy approach will be the government should give a concrete plan and implementation of policies in accordance with the distribution of limited resources, especially those who are in lower class. And that concludes our presentation. We are hoping that we met all our objectives. And then again, We are the Group 4